Here is a question that should make every digital inclusion advocate, every ICT minister, and every development partner deeply uncomfortable. Across Africa, mobile operators and internet service providers contribute a percentage of their annual revenues to universal service and access funds, levy-based mechanisms specifically designed to connect the people that commercial markets will not reach. Rural communities, low-income households, underserved schools and health facilities. These funds have been collecting money for decades. In some African countries, the accumulated balance runs into hundreds of millions of dollars. According to UNESCO's Digital Transformation Collaborative Finance Toolkit, published in April 2026, over $11 billion in universal service and access funds sits undisbursed across 64 countries studied globally. $11 billion sitting in accounts, designated to connect people who are still offline. And in Africa specifically, the continent with the largest unconnected population on Earth, the average disbursement rate across surveyed countries is just 54%. Nearly half of every dollar collected to connect the unconnected never reaches them. By the end of this video, you will understand the 5 structural reasons why universal service and access funds are failing across Africa, and why this is not primarily a story about corruption or mismanagement. It is a story about governance design, mandate clarity, institutional capacity, and the gap between what these funds were built to do and what they are actually being asked to deliver. And you will have 5 concrete reforms that can close that gap. The question I hear most often from ICT ministers, fund managers, and regulatory officials across the continent is some version of this. We have the fund, we have the mandate, we have the money sitting in the account, so why can't we spend it effectively? It is exactly the right question. And the honest answer is that the problem is almost never the money. It is almost always the architecture around the money. 51 of 54 African countries have introduced or are in the process of introducing a universal service fund mechanism. The policy instrument exists virtually everywhere. The delivery machinery to make it work exists almost nowhere. Let me break down the 5 reasons why. The 5 structural failures of USF implementation in Africa are specific, documented, and, importantly, all fixable. Let me take you through each one. Number 1, outdated mandates, funds built for a world that no longer exists. The first structural failure is the most fundamental. Most African universal service funds were established in the late 1990s and early 2000s, designed to extend fixed-line telephone access to rural communities. The world those mandates were written for has completely changed. Fixed-line telephony is irrelevant to digital inclusion in 2026. What communities need now is mobile broadband, affordable devices, digital literacy training, and locally relevant content. But in many African countries, the legal framework governing the fund still reflects the original mandate. The fund manager who wants to spend on digital literacy training or subsidize smartphones is legally constrained from doing so. The money sits. The mandate does not permit the spending that the moment requires. Picture a USF manager in a West African country. She has $40 million sitting in the fund account. She knows that removing import duties on smartphones and subsidizing data bundles would bring hundreds of thousands of people online within months. But the fund's legal mandate specifies voice telephony infrastructure in rural areas. Her hands are tied by a law written before smartphones existed. The money sits, the people remain offline. Number 2, institutional instability. Governance that cannot deliver. The second failure is institutional. In January 2026, South Africa's Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Communications expressed serious concern about prolonged leadership and governance instability at USAASA, the Universal Service and Access Agency of South Africa. The committee stated directly that this persistent instability continues to undermine institutional performance, accountability, and the effective delivery of the mandate. South Africa is not an outlier. The GSMA's study of USF performance across 40 African countries identified institutional instability as one of the most consistent structural impediments to effective disbursement. Fund managers are appointed politically. Boards are constituted and reconstituted with changes of government. Project pipelines are interrupted. Accountability mechanisms are weak. The result is an institution that collects money reliably, because operators are legally required to pay, but cannot spend it effectively because the institution itself is too fragile to manage complex infrastructure procurement processes. Number 3, transparency deficit. Nobody knows where the money goes. The third failure is transparency. According to the Londa 2025 report, one of the most comprehensive assessments of digital rights across Africa, published in June 2026, while Botswana and Malawi actively use their universal service funds to connect rural schools, many other nations manage their funds with zero transparency. No public reporting, no project disclosure, no outcome measurement. When there is no transparency, there is no accountability. And when there is no accountability, funds get directed toward projects that serve political objectives rather than connectivity objectives. Urban areas with existing commercial coverage get funded. Rural communities with no alternative remain unserved. The fund becomes a mechanism for subsidizing the already connected rather than connecting the genuinely unconnected. Number 4, the urban drift problem, funding, where operators already go. Which brings us directly to the fourth failure, one that the evidence documents with uncomfortable consistency. Universal service funds are supposed to go where commercial investment does not. They are supposed to compensate for market failure, to reach the communities that operators will never serve on a commercial basis because the economics do not work. But research across multiple African markets confirms that a significant portion of USF disbursements have gone to areas that would have received commercial investment anyway. Peri-urban areas, secondary towns with growing middle classes, communities where operators would have built infrastructure within 5 years without subsidy. The fund becomes a windfall for operators in commercially viable areas rather than a lifeline for communities in genuinely unserved ones. This is not always deliberate. It happens because USF project selection processes often default to the projects that are easiest to implement. Which are the projects in areas with some existing infrastructure? The hardest communities to reach, the ones the fund exists to serve, are also the most expensive and logistically complex to connect. Without competitive bidding requirements that specifically target genuinely unserved communities, urban drift is the path of least resistance. Number 5, sustainability blindness. Projects that work once and then stop. The fifth failure is perhaps the most heartbreaking, because it represents investment that actually reaches the right communities, but then fails to deliver lasting impact. USF-funded infrastructure projects in rural Africa regularly face the same fate. The tower is built, the connection is established, the community comes online, and then the project ends. The subsidy stops, and without a sustainable operational model, the infrastructure degrades or the service becomes unaffordable within 2 to 3 years. The project counts as a success in the fund's annual report. The community is back offline within 36 months. Namibia offers a positive example of what is possible when the model is designed for sustainability. The country's USF rollout provided 4G access to more than 9,000 citizens for the first time, by pairing infrastructure deployment with subsidized access arrangements that addressed affordability beyond the initial connection. Rwanda's approach of integrating USF investment with community digital hub networks has similarly produced durable outcomes. These are the exceptions. They need to become the standard. So given all of that, what does a universal service fund that actually works look like? And what must African governments and regulators do to get there? The strategic insight. Here is the strategic reframe I want every ICT minister, fund manager, and development partner watching this to hold on to. Universal service and access funds are not failing because of bad intentions. They are failing because they were designed for a different era, governed by institutions that lack the stability and capacity to manage complex procurement processes, measured by outputs that obscure outcomes, and deployed in ways that prioritize administrative convenience over genuine need. The $11 billion sitting undisbursed globally is not a sign that the instrument has failed. It is a sign that the instrument has not yet been redesigned for the challenge it now faces. The demand side of the digital inclusion problem, affordability, devices, skills, relevance, requires a fundamentally different approach from the supply-side infrastructure build-out that USFs were originally designed to fund. The GSMA study puts it plainly. Structural and operational challenges require urgent attention from policymakers and USF authorities, not incremental adjustment, urgent redesign. Because every year that $11 billion sits undisbursed is a year that 400 million people remain offline, not for lack of money, but for lack of the governance architecture to deploy it. So here are 5 reforms that can close the gap between the USF as designed and the USF that Africa actually needs. The practical takeaways. 1. Modernize the mandate. Every African USF operating under a legal framework written before 2010 needs urgent legislative review. The mandate must explicitly permit investment in mobile broadband infrastructure, device subsidies, digital literacy programs, and locally relevant content, not just legacy voice telephony infrastructure. Rwanda, Kenya, and Ghana have already begun this process. Every country must follow. 2. Depoliticize the institution. Fund managers must be appointed through merit-based, transparent processes with fixed terms and clear performance accountability frameworks. The USAASA experience in South Africa, where prolonged leadership instability directly undermined delivery, is the cautionary tale that every African government must study and learn from. Institutional stability is a prerequisite for effective disbursement. 3. Mandate public transparency. Every USF must publish annual reports detailing funds collected, funds disbursed, projects funded, locations served, and outcomes achieved, against independently verified metrics. No transparency, no accountability. No accountability, no results. This is not a suggestion. It is the minimum standard for a public fund collecting money from every licensed operator in the country. 4. Require competitive bidding for genuinely unserved areas. USF project selection must be anchored in nationally verified maps of unserved and underserved communities, not the judgment of fund managers or the preferences of incumbent operators. Competitive bidding with explicit eligibility requirements for genuinely unserved areas is the most effective mechanism available for preventing urban drift. 5. Build sustainability into every project design. Every USF-funded infrastructure project must include a 5-year operational sustainability plan as a condition of funding, with clear provisions for how the community will afford connectivity after the initial subsidy period ends. Infrastructure without affordability is a very expensive way to connect nobody. The Namibia and Rwanda models show that sustainability planning works. It must become continental standard. Conclusion and what's coming next. Africa's 400 million offline citizens are not offline because there is no money to connect them. In many cases, the money is already there, sitting in a fund account, collecting interest, waiting for the governance architecture to catch up with the ambition. That is not a connectivity failure. That is a policy failure. And policy failures, unlike spectrum gaps and fiber shortages, can be fixed with political will and the right institutional design. In our next video, we tackle a topic that directly connects to everything we have covered in video 1, 8 and now 9. It is about why African roaming is still expensive even when the regulatory agreements are in place. The answer is not in the regulation. It is in the routing and settlement architecture underneath it. The next video is called Route and Settle in Africa, the infrastructure fix that could finally make roaming affordable. It is a conversation that connects policy, infrastructure and economics in a way that will change how you think about the entire regional connectivity agenda. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you are there when it drops. If this video gave you a sharper lens on the USF challenge, share it with one person in your network who is making these decisions. And I will see you in the next video, and thank you for watching.